Welcome, beloved anointed ones. The most dangerous opponent is the one you don't realize is in the room until they've already rearranged the furniture in your mind. History has a nasty habit of proving one thing: the people who change the game rarely announce their arrival. Genghis Khan didn't RSVP to empires before taking them. The Trojan horse? It literally rolled in looking like a gift. Even viruses, the tiniest life forms on Earth, have wiped out civilizations without firing a single shot. Why? Because the element of surprise has always been the deadliest weapon. And you were the walking definition of that weapon. They thought they knew the cast of this story. They thought they had the plot locked down, the ending already written, and you safely boxed into the role they assigned you. Harmless background character, expendable extra. But while they were busy underestimating you, you were silently rewriting the entire script. And yes, now they're flipping through the pages, confused about how they became the side characters. What they didn't know is that your power didn't come from noise, titles, or approval. It came from operating in stealth mode, building in silence, and moving in ways they had no defense against. They expected fireworks. Instead, you became an earthquake. No countdown, no warning, just sudden, irreversible change. And let's be real, you didn't just show up. You walked in so subtly that by the time they noticed, you had already claimed the room, the strategy, and probably their favorite snack. So buckle up, because today we're pulling back the curtain on why they never saw you coming, why they now realize you're the most dangerous one in the arena, and why some of them are low-key Googling how to befriend someone you once underestimated. Number 1. You were hidden in plain sight until it was too late. They didn't see you coming because you were hidden in plain sight the entire time. You weren't hiding out of fear or uncertainty. You were hidden because it was the most strategic position you could have had. While everyone else was scrambling for attention, shouting to prove themselves, and announcing every little move, you kept your head down and let the noise drown itself out. They glanced at you, made a quick judgment, and decided you were no threat. That was their first and biggest mistake. They put you in a box so small they didn't even bother guarding it. In their minds, you were predictable, easy to read, incapable of disrupting the order they'd built. What they didn't realize was that every day you stayed ordinary in their eyes, you were quietly gaining ground. You were learning how they think, how they operate, what they fear, and where their blind spots are. You were watching their patterns, their arrogance, and their complacency, all while building yourself in the shadows. The most dangerous growth is the kind no one measures. It's the kind that happens where no one is looking. The roots under the soil that break concrete before anyone knows they're there. By the time they saw the signs of your rise, it was already irreversible. You weren't asking for a seat at the table because you were already influencing what got served on it. You weren't fighting for recognition because you were already holding power in places they didn't even know existed. What they never counted on was that being overlooked would become your weapon. The low expectations they had of you gave you the freedom to prepare without interference. No one was trying to sabotage what they couldn't see. No one was blocking doors they didn't know you were heading toward. You moved freely because they didn't think you could move at all. And when you finally stepped forward, you didn't come with a warning. You didn't come with noise or theatrics. You came with results. Undeniable, unshakable, and impossible to erase. It wasn't that you appeared out of nowhere. You had been there all along. They just weren't paying attention. And now their inability to see you for who you truly were has become the very reason they can't stop you. Number 2. They measured you by their weakness, not your potential. They judged you by the limits they knew for themselves, not by the possibilities that existed for you. Every expectation they had of you was filtered through their own fears, insecurities, and failures. If something seemed impossible to them, they assumed it was impossible for you too. If they would have given up at a certain point, they expected you to do the same. That's why their predictions about your life were always wrong. They were measuring you with a broken ruler. They didn't understand that your threshold for pain, perseverance, and endurance had been stretched far beyond the average. They didn't factor in the things you've already survived, the nights you've faced with nothing but grit holding you together, the weight you've carried without anyone seeing. In their minds, they believed everyone operates from the same level of strength they do, so they set their traps and made their moves thinking you would tap out long before you actually would. What they didn't know is that when they expected you to fall, you were just getting your footing. When they thought you were finished, you were really just changing gears. Their underestimation didn't slow you down. It fueled you. Every time they decided you couldn't handle something, you not only handled it, you mastered it, and then you used it as a stepping stone to the next level. They kept calculating your breaking point, but they didn't realize you had already gone beyond it years ago and lived to tell the story. They thought certain obstacles would stop you because they couldn't imagine facing them themselves. But you've been through worse. You've seen darker days, harsher storms, and tighter corners. And you didn't just survive, you grew sharper inside them. This is why they could never truly prepare for you. You don't operate on their limits. You don't have the same ceiling they have. Your endurance has been built through experiences they wouldn't last a week in. And because they refused to believe you had that kind of resilience, they never developed a strategy strong enough to contain you. They were fighting against the version of you that existed in their minds, not the reality of who you are. That's why they lost before they even started. Number 3, you built power when no one was watching. While they were busy guarding doors and keeping you out of certain rooms, you were building your power somewhere they weren't even looking. They thought that by blocking you from their platforms and networks, they had successfully limited your reach. What they failed to understand is that real strength doesn't come from standing on their stages. It comes from building your own foundation in places no one can touch. You learned early on that influence created in the open can be taken away, but influence built in the shadows becomes untouchable. Every time they said no, you found another route. Every time they closed a door, you learned how to operate without it. You gathered resources they didn't even think were valuable, forged relationships they didn't know existed, and learned skills they didn't believe you needed. You weren't chasing their approval. You were crafting an arsenal so diverse and unexpected that when you finally moved, there would be nothing they could do to stop you. They thought the wilderness would weaken you. In reality, it refined you. Away from their noise and their control, you discovered how to work under pressure without an audience. You trained yourself to operate without constant recognition, and that gave you a dangerous kind of independence, the kind they can't bribe, threaten, or manipulate. By the time you re-entered their world, you weren't dependent on it anymore. The beauty of building in secret is that there's no one to sabotage what they can't see. While they were busy competing with each other for attention, you were stacking victories in silence. You learned how to strike from angles they never considered, and that alone makes you unpredictable. When you finally showed results, it wasn't because you suddenly became skilled or resourceful. It was because you had been that way for a long time. You just didn't need to prove it on their timeline. Now they're realizing too late that their watchful eyes were pointed in the wrong direction. They were guarding the gates while you were building the city behind them. The influence you carry now wasn't handed to you. It was created in a place they can't trace back, which is exactly why they can't undo it. Your power wasn't born in their system, so it will never have to answer to it. Number 4, they expected revenge. You mastered strategy instead. They were certain that if you ever gained the upper hand, you would react exactly like they would, with loud outbursts, visible retaliation, and impulsive moves meant to make a scene. They braced themselves for an emotional explosion, for the kind of revenge that feeds on chaos but dies quickly. That's the only kind of response they understood, because that's the only kind of power they know how to use. But you didn't give them that satisfaction. You didn't rush into a fight that would burn out fast. You chose something colder, sharper, and far more enduring. You mastered the kind of strategy that doesn't waste energy on proving a point in the moment. Instead of swinging wildly, you studied the terrain. You learned where the real power flows, who truly calls the shots, and what systems actually keep their influence alive. You stopped aiming at people and started dismantling the structures that protect them. That's why they feel their control slipping but can't figure out why. They were prepared to counter a fight, not to survive a silent shift in the balance of power. While they were watching for dramatic moves, you were making quiet changes that rewired the entire board they were playing on. You removed pieces without them noticing, positioned yourself in places they never thought to guard, and created alliances they didn't even know existed. By the time they realized what was happening, their influence was already bleeding out. This wasn't about revenge for you. It was about securing your position in a way that couldn't be undone. You weren't interested in short-term wins that made you look strong for a moment, but left you exposed later. You were playing for permanence, making moves that would stand long after their noise faded. The same patience they mistook for weakness became the weapon that outlasted their aggression. Now, they're stuck in a position they can't escape, not because you shouted them down, but because you quietly replaced the very ground they were standing on. They expected to battle with your emotions. Instead, they ran into your strategy. And that's a fight they were never prepared to win. Number 5, they never accounted for your spiritual clearance. They never accounted for the fact that you operate on a level they can't see or measure. Every plan they built, every scheme they deployed, was designed to counter human limits. Fears, greed, anger, and short-sightedness. They assumed you worked the same way they did, reacting predictably to pressure, to threats, to manipulation. What they didn't know is that your strength isn't just human. Your moves have a kind of backing they can't touch or trace. Your clearance is spiritual, and that makes all the difference. Because of this unseen authority, the usual rules don't apply to you. Traps they spent weeks setting up fail the moment you approach, because you don't respond to them like everyone else does. People who thought they could predict your steps are left scratching their heads as you bypass obstacles they believed were impossible to overcome. The same people who planned against you think they are dealing with a human adversary. But your alignment is something entirely different, something they never even considered when they assumed they had control. They also underestimate how this affects your timing and precision. Where they stumble, hesitate, or miscalculate, you move with an accuracy that feels almost unnatural. They leave openings, unaware that you can see vulnerabilities they didn't even know existed. Their attempts to corner you or manipulate outcomes crumble because your guidance is calibrated by something far beyond their understanding. Every move you make has foresight baked into it, and that foresight comes from a source they cannot challenge. And that's why their frustration grows faster than their comprehension. They realize too late that they're not merely competing with your skill, knowledge, or intelligence. They are trying to contain something they can't even name, a force that sees their intentions before they act and moves in ways that bypass their defenses entirely. They didn't expect that your influence, timing, and impact would be untouchable in ways they can't rationalize. When they finally understand, it will be too late. Their strategies crumble, their power fades, and the very system they relied on to maintain control becomes irrelevant. They never saw this coming because you were never operating on the same playing field. You were cleared to move where they cannot, and they never even suspected the magnitude of what they were up against. Number 6, you became immune to the weapons that worked on others. Every tactic they used against others, every manipulation, every insult, every attempt to distract or control fell flat on you. What works on the average person, the ones who bend under pressure or crumble at the first betrayal, simply doesn't work on you. Their methods were designed to provoke fear, doubt, or reaction, but you've built immunity to all of it. Every attack that would have crippled someone else only made you sharper, more resilient, and more untouchable. They didn't understand that their weapons required a certain kind of vulnerability to be effective. They thrived on fear, uncertainty, and the need for validation. But you don't operate from any of those weaknesses. Every criticism, every attempt to gaslight, every scheme they concocted to control the narrative only highlighted their limitations while revealing your adaptability. You were observing their patterns, learning from their mistakes, and becoming a blueprint for how not to manipulate someone who refuses to be manipulated. The more they tried to knock you off balance, the more you learned how to predict their next move. Every attempt to silence you sharpened your voice. Every effort to discredit you strengthened your credibility. Every distraction they threw your way became training in focus and patience. In the process, they were proving to themselves how ineffective they really are, and you were proving to everyone else how unstoppable you've become. They assumed that repeating the same strategies that worked on others would guarantee the same results with you. They didn't consider that every person has a breaking point, and you've already pushed past yours countless times. They didn't account for the fact that experience, perspective, and self-mastery turn attacks into lessons and lessons into power. Now their tools are useless. They were perfect for the kind of people who bend, but you don't bend. They built themselves on a foundation that relied on controlling others, and when that foundation met you, it cracked. You became the living proof that their methods were flawed. They weaponized control, and you weaponized endurance. They tried to break you, and instead, you became the standard they can't reach. Number 7. Your patience was mistaken for passivity. They saw your patience and assumed it was weakness, a quiet compliance that could be pushed around, ignored, or dismissed. Every pause, every measured step you took looked like hesitation to them. They didn't understand that your calm wasn't indecision, it was strategy. While they rushed, panicked, and reacted to every little threat, you were watching, taking notes, and quietly analyzing every angle of the battlefield. Their moves, their words, their alliances, they were all revealing themselves to you without even knowing it. They assumed that acting fast and making noise was the way to dominate, and they couldn't grasp that your restraint gave you an advantage no one else could see. You weren't passively waiting. You were actively learning. You were collecting patterns, observing weaknesses, and understanding not just what they wanted, but how far they were willing to go to get it. Every impatient move they made, every overreach, only confirmed your insight. By the time you decided it was time to act, you didn't need to try multiple angles or second-guess your approach. You had everything mapped out already. You knew exactly when to step in, exactly where to strike, and exactly how to dismantle their influence in a way they wouldn't see coming. Your patience allowed you to conserve energy and resources while they wasted theirs, proving their own limitations. What they mistook for passivity became your secret weapon. Their arrogance told them that someone so quiet, so measured, could never be dangerous. They couldn't imagine that someone who doesn't react immediately is actually the one preparing the most effective response. And when the time came for you to move, they were blindsided, confused, and powerless, because your one calculated strike achieved what a dozen impulsive attacks never could. Their misjudgment of patience as weakness wasn't just a mistake. It was the reason you gained the upper hand. They revealed themselves completely, and you exploited it with precision. Waiting wasn't inaction, it was control, it was intelligence. It was the reason that, in the end, when you did move, there was no question of victory. Number 8. You're not playing on the same battlefield. They are busy scrapping over titles, status, and temporary wins, thinking those small victories define power. Every move they make is meant to impress, to dominate a stage they believe matters, to prove superiority to people who are equally short-sighted. They measure influence by applause and recognition, unaware that the rules they play by are only effective within their limited dimension. They're fighting battles that don't matter to the bigger picture, and that's exactly why they can't touch you. You operate on a completely different plane. While they chase validation, you're dismantling the systems they rely on, shifting outcomes, and creating opportunities that no one else even sees. You influence things before they even exist, positioning yourself in ways that make their efforts irrelevant. Their attacks, their schemes, their attempts to compete, they all land harmlessly because you've already moved beyond the arena they inhabit. They can't understand what they can't see. They assume victory is about force, volume, and confrontation. You know it's about leverage, timing, and strategic positioning. By the time they realize a shift has occurred, the landscape has already changed. The rules they depended on no longer apply. Their strategies crumble because they are designed to operate within their limited battlefield, while you've already built a new one entirely. That's why defeating you is impossible in the way they think it should be. They're not even competing on the same plane, and everything they try to throw at you simply highlights the difference between their short-term thinking and your long-term vision. They react to surface-level moves while you're influencing outcomes at a structural level. Their wins are temporary, your impact is permanent. Every move they make now is a reaction, a desperate attempt to engage in a fight that has no meaning to you. You've shifted the entire game without ever stepping into the game they were playing. And that's the kind of power they can't comprehend, the kind of influence they can't predict, and the kind of legacy they can't challenge. Number 9. They didn't recognize the currency you trade in. They couldn't see the kind of wealth you were building because it wasn't the kind they understand. They measure success by money, followers, titles, and appearances. That's their standard. They assumed you were playing the same game, chasing the same trophies, and worrying about the same scoreboard. What they didn't realize is that you trade in currencies far more valuable: trust, truth, and timing. These are the kinds of assets that no amount of money can buy, and no number of followers can replicate. While they were obsessed with hoarding influence that is temporary and fragile, you were quietly creating foundations that are permanent and unshakable. Trust you've built can't be taken away overnight. Truth you operate in can't be manipulated or erased. Timing you master ensures that every move lands with maximum effect. These aren't flashy wins for the moment. They are victories that shift realities. And because you understand this, your power doesn't depend on anyone's approval. You don't need applause or status to validate your presence, and that makes you untouchable in ways they never imagined. Their obsession with shallow measures made them blind to the depth of your strategy. They thought hoarding followers or money meant security, but they failed to see that these things crumble without a foundation. Every empire built on superficial gain can collapse when a force like yours, rooted in the unseen yet undeniable currencies, moves into its orbit. You don't just survive in chaos, you thrive in it, converting their assumptions into opportunities, their miscalculations into leverage. By the time they notice the shift, it's too late. They realize too late that their influence was fleeting, fragile, and dependent on recognition. Meanwhile, you've been stacking victories they can't touch and shaping outcomes they can't control. Their empire falters in your shadow not because you attacked it directly, but because your wealth operates on a different plane, one that is real, lasting, and fundamentally unassailable. They never recognized the currency you trade in, and that's why their power has always been temporary and yours has always been inevitable. Number 10. You've weaponized the very pain they tried to destroy you with. Every blow they delivered, every insult, every betrayal was meant to weaken you, to make you smaller, to break your spirit. They believed that pain would cage you, that suffering would bend you to their will. What they didn't understand is that you have a way of transforming pain into power. Every wound became a tool, every scar a weapon. The very things they thought would destroy you became the foundation of your strength. You learned how to endure without losing yourself. You discovered how to bleed without breaking, to absorb every strike and convert it into something sharper, something more precise. Each attempt to wound you only honed your perception, sharpened your instincts, and strengthened your resolve. They were trying to destroy you, and instead they trained you. Every attack added layers to your resilience that no one could see, let alone dismantle. Now those scars are silent assassins. They aren't visible like bruises or broken bones, but they carry authority. People feel it when you walk into a room, the weight of experience, the awareness that you have faced adversity they couldn't imagine and come out stronger. The pain they hoped would humiliate you now intimidates them, without you ever having to raise your voice. Every mark they left has become a lesson, a strategy, a tool for moving through the world with unstoppable precision. They never accounted for the way you process suffering. They assumed that what breaks most people would break you, but they were wrong. You've turned vulnerability into armor, heartbreak into focus, and betrayal into insight. The very things they thought would make you weak have become invisible weapons they can't defend against. By the time they realize it, their attempts to control or harm you have already backfired. Every move they made to weaken you has strengthened you in ways they can't reverse. You are not just surviving their attacks, you are thriving because of them. Pain became your ally, scars became your signals, and every room you enter now carries the silent echo of every battle they thought would defeat you. Number 11. They trained you without knowing it. Every betrayal, every attempt to undermine you, every act of sabotage was a lesson you didn't even ask for. They thought they were teaching you fear, doubt, and obedience. But in reality, they were schooling you in the most valuable knowledge anyone could have, the truth about human nature. They revealed themselves in ways no book, no lecture, and no mentor could have. You watched patterns emerge, motives exposed, and weaknesses exploited, and you absorbed it all without them even realizing it. Every trap they set became a blueprint for how not to be controlled. Every lie they told, every scheme they executed, became a lesson in discernment and strategy. While they intended to weaken you, they inadvertently strengthened your perception. You learned how to recognize deception before it even fully materialized. You learned how to anticipate manipulation and neutralize it quietly. They thought they were keeping you contained, but in reality, they were building your map for a battlefield they could never imagine. The irony is that their worst intentions became your training ground. Every hardship, every moment of being underestimated or attacked, refined you. It taught patience, resilience, and the ability to turn adversity into power. You developed skills they couldn't see forming, skills that operate in a realm beyond their comprehension. They never realized that by trying to break you, they were equipping you with everything necessary to move far beyond their reach. That's why they can't follow you. They created a version of you that exists on a plane they never intended and never prepared for. The battlefield you now navigate is built from lessons they unknowingly delivered, lessons they will never be capable of replicating or understanding. Their interference became the catalyst for your growth, and the very structures they thought would confine you became the launch pad for your dominance. By the time they grasp what happened, it will be too late. You are no longer playing by their rules, moving on their terrain, or bound by their expectations. They trained you without knowing it, and now every move you make is informed by wisdom born from their own attempts to destroy you. You've become untouchable in ways they could never anticipate because they unknowingly forged the very force they sought to defeat. Number 12. You've mastered the art of ending wars before they start. You've learned that true power isn't always about confrontation or brute force. Most people measure strength by who can hit harder or shout louder, but you understand that the most dangerous moves are invisible. You've mastered the ability to end conflicts before they even have a chance to begin. By reading intentions, sensing weaknesses, and controlling the flow of energy around you, you create situations where opposition collapses on its own. They don't even realize a battle existed until it's already over. They expect confrontation because that's all they know. They prepare for fights with noise, aggression, and strategy meant to overpower. What they don't anticipate is your capacity to shift atmospheres, to make their opponents question themselves before they take action, and to make resistance feel unnecessary or impossible. The mere presence of your awareness, your timing, and your calculated posture destabilizes them. You've learned to influence the outcome without ever drawing a sword. The war ends because the battlefield itself bends to your understanding. Every time someone considers challenging you, your skill in maneuvering circumstances ensures their energy is wasted before it even reaches you. You've learned how to identify weak points, not just in people, but in systems, alliances, and intentions. By nudging situations subtly, adjusting timing, or allowing others to reveal their own miscalculations, you've become capable of controlling results without ever appearing to act. They might leave thinking they've made a move, but in reality, you've already orchestrated the scenario so that victory was inevitable for you all along. Danger in your hands is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need spectacle. By the time they notice the shift, their will to fight has been dismantled, their plans disrupted, and their confidence eroded. You've taken what would have been battles and turned them into illusions. The opposition dissolves before it ever manifests. That's why they cannot challenge you effectively. They are prepared for noise, but you operate in the spaces where noise doesn't matter. You've discovered the art of control without conflict. You've learned how to disarm, destabilize, and redirect without ever stepping into the obvious fight. That skill alone makes you more dangerous than any weapon, more unstoppable than any army, and more feared than any opponent could imagine. Number 13. You operate without needing their permission or recognition. You don't operate on their terms, and that's why their power over you is non-existent. They thrive on controlling people who crave approval, who need permission, and who seek validation from others to feel secure. That's how they maintain influence, by keeping people dependent on recognition. You've cut that cord entirely. You don't need their nod, their applause, or even their acknowledgement to move forward. Their tools of control simply don't work on you because you aren't playing by the rules they set. They can't cancel you, block you, or blacklist you because you were never relying on their acceptance to begin with. They built walls around influence, assuming everyone wants to be inside, but you've built your own system, your own network, and your own foundation. You don't sit at their table because you've already created a council that can't be penetrated or undermined by their petty attempts at control. Your authority exists independently of their permission, which makes it untouchable. The moment they realize that their leverage is useless against you, frustration sets in. They begin to scramble, to negotiate, to scheme, but nothing works because they are trying to manipulate someone who doesn't require manipulation. You move freely, make decisions freely, and claim opportunities freely. Their attempts to assert dominance are like waving a stick at a shadow, ineffective and meaningless. Operating without needing recognition changes the entire dynamic of power. While they expend energy trying to control, impress, or intimidate, you are building, strategizing, and expanding in ways they cannot detect or influence. Their authority is limited to those who fear it. Your authority is inherent, self-sustained, and permanent. That is why they can never predict your moves, outmaneuver you, or contain your growth. By removing yourself from their validation cycle, you've rendered their control irrelevant. You've become independent, unstoppable, and untouchable. And that's why they never saw you coming. Every move you make is yours alone, and no external approval can ever shift your trajectory. Their influence dies in your shadow because your power was never theirs to claim. Number 14. Your victory is not for show, it's for permanence. Your victory isn't about applause, recognition, or temporary bragging rights. You don't measure success the way they do, with flash and spectacle, or by how loud the crowd cheers. Their idea of winning is fleeting, tied to moments that disappear as quickly as they arrive. You play a different game entirely. Your focus has always been on permanence, on creating outcomes, systems, and legacies that endure long after the noise has faded. Every move you make, every decision you take, is calculated to last, to leave a mark that cannot be erased. They think they're competing with you in the moment, reacting to your actions and plotting counters. But what they don't realize is that the ground you're building on is far deeper than theirs. While they scramble for temporary victories, you're laying foundations that will outlast their entire influence. Their wins are fragile, dependent on fleeting conditions and unstable alliances. Your work, on the other hand, is engineered to survive every storm, every challenge, every attempt to undermine it. By the time they even begin to understand the depth of what you've accomplished, it will be too late. History will have already shifted, systems will have already changed, and the rules they thought controlled the game will no longer exist. Your success doesn't rely on their permission or awareness. It grows independently, quietly, but irreversibly, until it becomes undeniable. This is why they can't stop you. They've spent so long thinking in short-term terms, looking for immediate results and expecting instant gratification. You've been working on timelines that extend far beyond their comprehension, creating outcomes that cannot be undone by petty interference or fleeting opposition. Every obstacle they throw in your way only adds to the permanence of what you've built, because you've designed your path to adapt, absorb, and thrive under pressure. Your victory is not for show. It is permanent, unshakable, and inevitable. It doesn't need applause, recognition, or validation to exist. It simply is. By the time they fully grasp what you've accomplished, history will already be rewritten in your favor, and there will be nothing they can do to change it. They never saw you coming because you weren't playing by their rules. Every assumption they made about you, every expectation they set, every trap they built, it all failed because you operate on a plane they can't even measure. While they chased applause, control, and recognition, you were building power in silence, mastering strategy, and turning every attack, every betrayal, every obstacle into fuel for your rise. You've weaponized pain, mastered timing, and dismantled systems without ever needing permission. Your patience, your insight, and your alignment with forces they can't comprehend have made you untouchable, unpredictable, and unstoppable. They thought they could intimidate you, manipulate you, or stop you, but their tools only sharpened your focus. Every move they made against you revealed their limitations while strengthening your own. You didn't need to strike impulsively because you learned how to end wars before they even began. You don't measure victory like they do because your success isn't temporary, it's permanent. By the time they understand the depth of your work, the course of history will already have shifted in your favor. You are more than underestimated. You are more than resilient. You are a force they cannot anticipate, a presence they cannot control, and a legacy they cannot erase. Every step they miscalculated, every strategy they perfected for others, every attempt to suppress you has only paved the way for your dominance. You are the embodiment of strategy, patience, and unseen authority. You didn't just survive the battlefield, you mastered it. So let this be clear. You are not here to participate in their games. You are here to redefine the rules, rewrite outcomes, and leave a mark that cannot be contested. They thought they had power over you. They were wrong. You were always the one in control, the one shaping reality, and the one they could never stop. This is your moment. Your rise is unstoppable, and anyone who doubted you will now be forced to witness the full extent of what they never saw coming. If this message hits you at a deep level, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe to the channel now, hit that like button to show your power, and drop a comment below. Share your story, your truth, or how this resonated with you. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the world needs to know what happens when the underestimated rise. Every click, every comment, every share spreads the message and strengthens the movement. Step into your power and make your presence known. Let's shake the system together. God bless you.